That's good. And let's get to this the heart of this question that we got here, because I think this is a really good one. If morals are objective, why are God's commands different now than they were in the Old Testament? Doesn't that suggest some sort of change either in objective moral law or in God's nature? And so I liked how you brought up the Euthyphro dilemma, because I think on a lot of levels that kind of ties into some of this. But how would you answer this? Because again, this happens all the time.
Yeah.
For those of us that are online, if you follow like Tom Jump and Capturing Christianity is Cameron Bertuzzi. He has the "by the way, Christianity is true" kind of tagline that he likes to put up. And Tom Jump, or somebody, I saw Tom Jump post it, said, "By the way, Jesus drowns babies," or something along that line. And that was kind of like, okay, I think we should address this. And I almost captured that meme and put it up on the screen for us to talk about. But I think this question kind of captures some of that. We don't necessarily have to get into the Jesus drowning babies thing, but there seems to
drowning
be
pigs.
Drowning babies.
Okay.
Apparently,
with the whole situation that took place at Galilee, but in the Old Testament, then he's thinking of the flood.
Right, he's thinking of the flood. Yeah. So, but there seems to be this change, and slavery was once thought of to be okay, and now it's abhorrent. There's lots of different things in the Old Testament that seem to be moving and shifting and changing. The wearing of different fabrics, and putting marks on your skin. You've done a few videos on tattoos and things like that. So we don't have to go into kind of the unpacking all of those different things, but just talk about the idea of, does that mean that they change and they're not objective?
I can understand how somebody could think this at first glance, right? Like, hey, what's going on here? But this is where we have to slow down, and it takes time, honestly, to understand the scriptures. I think about, I've been studying the Bible now for 28 years, 29 years, and I kind of just feel like I'm just getting started still. It takes time to understand the context of the different passages. So yes, God is an accommodating God. He meets us where we are in order to bring us to where he's at. Now, God's objective, moral nature doesn't change, but his prescriptions do. And so when you think about, for example, under a theocratic context, where you had the priests and the Levites, and you had the tabernacle, and you had all that set up. Well, that looked and served a different purpose. So many people, they get so thrown off because they read Leviticus, but they don't understand the wider picture. So it's kind of like, this is where God's people were at a particular time and place in history. And the moral prescriptions that he prescribed to his people for that point in time held. But that's not to say that out of the same morally good nature that God has, that he won't change the prescriptions and won't adjust things. Think about it like this. I have certain things that I prescribed to my kids as a dad when I was parenting them, certain rules that they were to oblige by. Now, I changed those rules at different times, but those rules were objectively what the rules were for that time and place. It didn't change. It didn't make me a relativist because I changed the rules. No, those rules in that time, in that place, were objectively my moral expectations of my kids, which were their obligations. What happened is there were, as they matured, or as things change, or as you're in a different context, my prescription would change for them. And so that's not me being a relativist. That's just me having a wide range of ways that I can prescribe what it is that I have for expectations. So some of the commands then that God had for people under the old covenant and under a theocracy don't apply to us today. Now, that's not to say that God is wishy-washy, that God is a relativist. That's just to say that God had a certain set of expectations, and requirements for a people living in a particular place and a particular time. And all of that then would go to showcase something very beautiful. Like Leviticus, it's one of my favorite Old Testament books. I remember going away on a sabbatical several years ago, and that's what I studied for my sabbatical. I just lived in the book of Leviticus, and I tweaked on the book of Leviticus, and I felt like, hey, it was very, very helpful to me, because it allowed me to understand. So, for example, you'll see something like, that this guy's going to get stoned to death for picking up sticks on a Sabbath. And we think, what the heck's going on? Well, we don't do that today. We don't stone somebody for not coming to church. Some pastors might want to, but that's not a good idea. But what's going on in Leviticus, or what's going on in the scriptures when it talks about, stoning somebody for picking up sticks? Then the new atheists, they go get a hold of that, and then they obviously make us just look so stupid and ignorant for believing in that. But we have to understand, under a theocracy, God had a certain way that the people were to live to be light to the surrounding nations. And if somebody was just going to adamantly go pick up sticks and not go by Sabbath, something that was so incredibly important to God's people at that time in that place, it was basically like shaking their fist in the face of God and saying, you know what, we're going to live however we want, and we're going to seek to overturn the theocracy as it's been presented to us. And so basically these strict punishments were issued to be meted out on people who wanted to overturn the theocracy. And so God had a set of standards that he expected people to live by, but we have to step back and understand the bigger picture.
Yeah, the stakes were definitely high in that, and that's why I think we see some of what we see there in the Old Testament. Maybe just real quickly, again, in this theme of making complicated things simple, I've heard it said before that there were kind of maybe like different categories of laws in the Old Testament. There was kind of more of like a civil law and a ceremonial law, and then like a moral law. Is that something that you would kind of address as well? So the civil law is more for kind of day-to-day activities, kind of like speed limits and stuff like that we have. There was an equivalent to that in the Old Testament, and then there was like purification laws for the priests, but then there was also these moral laws which were kind of applicable to everybody, those outside Israel that God judged. Is that a way that you would parse that out as well?
Yeah, I mean, some people can get uncomfortable with that kind of a distinction, but I don't personally, and I would even add in the dietary law. So take, for example, the dietary law, and then you see in Acts chapter 10 where Peter's on the rooftop and he hears the words, rise, kill, and eat, right? And he says, hey, I've never eaten anything unclean. In other words, I'm kosher in the way that I eat. And what does Jesus say? Don't call unclean what I have made clean. So in other words, even the dietary law served a purpose for a particular time and a particular place. And the purpose that it served was a lot about distinction between, holy and unholy, Gentile and Jew. And so this idea of, hey, don't call unholy what I've made holy. In other words, under the new covenant, this Abrahamic covenant that I gave, this promise to Abraham, it's really going to be able to be fulfilled as the gospel is taken to all nations. And so who knocks on the door just shortly after that? Right? Some servants from Cornelius's household, and he's a Jew, a God-fearing Gentile. And now Gentiles are to be saved. So in other words, God is a great illustrator, and he would use a lot of stuff in an illustrative way. And so if we don't understand that God's illustrating a deeper point with Ezekiel laying on his side for 390 days and then flipping over and giving God another 40 days, we will be confused, or 45 days. We will scratch our head. But when we take time to understand the milieu, the context by which the Bible is written, we can see some of these often seemingly bizarre laws, these dietary things like shellfish and other things, that this is kosher, non-kosher. This is Jew, Gentile. And now under the new covenant, we have Galatians chapter 3, where there's neither slave nor free, Jew nor Gentile, for all are made one in Christ Jesus. And so this is why it's so frustrating when people want a fast and quick and easy education, or they go and get informed on what they think is right and wrong by watching people's Twitter feed or blurbs, because it takes a long time to understand what's going on here. And so we got to be careful that we don't slip into chronological snobbery where we think that we are the most sophisticated culture and we look down on people from 2 to 3,000 and 3,500 years ago. We need to realize, had those people lived when we did, they too would, Snapchat. They too would get on Twitter. They too would use Instagram. But we have to realize if we were born when they did, so we stand on the shoulders of a long heritage, and we realize that as an accommodating God, God meets us where we are to bring us to where he's at. And he'll prescribe different things to us for a particular time and place, but it doesn't make him a relativist. Rather, it just makes him the one true wise God, knowing how to prescribe things that fit us for the time we live in.